Welcome to the Grid League podcast, where we tell the stories of the players and teams in the Florida Grid League. All right, guys, we're here for another one of our chats with the commissioner. I got the commissioner of the Grid League, Mather Wiswall, with me. What's up, Mather?
What's going on, Nick? How are you?
I'm good, man. How are you?
Pretty good. No complaints.
Okay, cool. We are here to talk about a controversial topic in the sport of grid, right? And it would be very easy to just call this one. Let's talk to the haters. All right, let's talk to the Grid League haters. Mather, you won't say it, but I will. The league has had what we would call pretty explosive growth over the last couple of years, and that has attracted a whole bunch of people who are butthurt. And they have lots of things to say and lots of feelings to share. And we figured we'd talk to them. We'd bring up some of the things we hear most commonly. We would, highlight why they're probably wrong about those things, and why grid is so badass. So,
but also, are they right about anything? I think that's important too.
You're right, because they probably are right about a couple of them. But if you cry about 30 things, there's probably only one or two that are worth crying about. So. Let's dive into some of those things, right? So Mather, when we in our pre-pod we talked a little bit. There's kind of like three kinds of grid haters, right? Like, what are they? What are those? Let's talk about one of them. What's one of those types of people who hate on grid?
Yeah, well, one quick preference or preface, I should say, is that personally, I welcome the haters, and I think it's a good sign, because if you're not doing anything. Or if you're not getting hated on, then you're not doing anything important. We'll put it that way. There's not enough people paying attention to what's going on if you're not getting haters. So I think it's a good sign personally, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't have a negative impact on some people in some situations. So I love this topic. I always love beating it up a little bit. So there's a few different kinds, and we were talking about what the kinds are, and I think the ones that have the least relevance to really talk about too much, because they just don't relate to us too much and kind of get thrown out of the window anyway already, is the ones that just hate anything that they think has any association with what CrossFit is. So basically CrossFit haters. And we obviously are not CrossFit in any way and are very different in many, many ways. And that's a whole nother episode. But people that see a butterfly pull up or anything that involves a swing oftentimes will associate that with CrossFit, or doing high rep snatches or anything like that. And so they might immediately associate the sport of grid, honestly, as CrossFit, which is not accurate in any sense. And therefore leave some sort of hater comment about, you've seen them before, is like 0 reps were done that day. I think it is like one of those.
Yep.
One of those like 4 phrases that they use like a million times and then giggle about it like it's never been used before, But yeah, so 0 reps that day, or do a real pull-up, those kinds of fun comments that we see all the time.
Yeah, and right, like CrossFit, the brand and the sport really wanted to, for a long time, kind of have like that in your face mentality, right? Like, we're better than you. Everything we're doing is crazy impressive, and you couldn't do this. And that's kind of this whole, like, you want to talk shit, we'll talk shit back, that mentality, right? Like, that was definitely a CrossFit thing, their ethos for a while, And I think that kind of cultivated this mentality where, like, people who like CrossFit like to talk shit, and people who don't like it really want you to know they don't like it. Like, they need you to know that they don't like it,
Right.
When I was in the Army, it was really common for everybody to talk as much shit as they could about how crappy CrossFit was, Meanwhile, like, none of us had ever done it. We had no idea what we were upset about. It was just something, like, we had emotional feelings about it, And then people see grid on the internet and it looks a little bit like CrossFit, and there's people wearing similar colors and doing like really exciting things. And they're like, that must be the worst kind of CrossFit. I hate it so much.
Right.
Right. I think that's what a lot of those people are feeling as they see it,
Yeah, I agree. And I think you're right. Like, not as much now at all, but in the past, CrossFit came at it very combatively as to how they would address that kind of criticism. We don't take that kind of approach, but that has left a lot of people that have a lot of influence over other people that create a narrative about how these movements are terrible, and they can be, for sure. If used incorrectly, and same is true of a snatch or a squat or a deadlift, movements that have been around for thousands of years. If you do them incorrectly, they can be pretty darn dangerous. But that's also a training related criticism, which has absolutely nothing to do with us, because we don't develop fitness. We're not about fitness in any way. There's components of what make up fitness that we somewhat highlight, but that can also be called athleticism, and football does a very similar thing. So that's why I kind of like throw that group of haters out a little bit, because it's not like we even really care if they're going to pay attention to what we have to say or not. It's more, they've already written anybody that does anything kipping off as an idiot, and go do you, type thing.
Yeah. I like to think of that group as the group that would complain about ice water being too cold. They're going to be unhappy no matter what. And this is just the thing they're finding to be unhappy about on the internet, right?
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So what's that next group then, Heather?
Okay. So I would say probably a group that we have the potential to reel back in as somebody that might flip the switch on being a grid hater. And I believe this is the category that you actually fall in. And that is that you've had some sort of interaction with the sport of grid in the past. And whether that interaction was seeing it in some sort of video, or you actually played, or you interacted with somebody associated with it, or you were on a team, or you refereed, whatever it is, where you had an experience that was associated with that interaction that created, it was a negative experience in some way, and then therefore, put the sport in a light that maybe is unfair, because you associate it with that negative experience. And if I remember when I first met you, you didn't initially get grit at all, and were not like, you weren't openly vocal about it, but you didn't get it. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's definitely true. I thought grid was weird and dumb. I didn't understand why people liked it. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I understand why this happens. It makes total sense. Like, especially if you have, thought processes about how a movement should look, or, what you expect to see in certain instances. Mm-hmm. And then you see grid and it conflicts with that. Even if it was just an instant, your immediate perception can, as a holistic thing, can immediately be affected. And it's in human nature. And I get that and understand that. But that category of people oftentimes can be converted, because when they understand the different application of a movement, or completely different requirements of a movement, or the thought process behind why somebody does what they do in relation to the sport and what the application of the sport is, it throws what their immediate reaction or initial reaction was. And if it was associated with the NPGL or a team, or some other entity that was running the sport of grid not related to us, then that's a whole nother set of complications that have nothing really to do with the sport itself or how we run the sport, but can ultimately affect the perception of it.
Yeah, right. And so I think you hit on like two very different groups of people there, right? Mm-hmm. So there's people who have a negative interaction, like actually have that interaction, or almost like have a perceived interaction, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I think I fell into that second group, that perceived interaction, right? I was at the time probably heavily identified as like a CrossFitter, right? I went to a CrossFit gym. I was an owner of a CrossFit gym. I loved CrossFit and everything about CrossFit. And let's say something as stupid as thrusters, I watched thrusters happen. And I think this is how it has to be done, Mm-hmm. And then I watch Nick Sheppy from the Wild last year doing thrusters and clusters faster than I think is humanly possible, in a way that doesn't look like the way that I'm training myself to do it or training other people to do it. I think that must be wrong. That must be dumb,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And like we talked about that. It's obviously that, like, that's not the case. If I'm training somebody to safely execute the movement of thrusters as part of a strength and conditioning program, they should probably be done one way, Mm-hmm. If your goal is to get it done as fast as possible, that is totally different, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think a really good comparison, especially for CrossFitters, is when CrossFit came onto the scene, they were the first entity ever to use a snatch as a light weight and for multiple reps. And well, weightlifters didn't like that too much. That's not why you weightlift. You weightlift for max weight, and the essence of the movement and how you teach it and everything is thrown out the window when you're doing a snatch 100 times at 60 pounds or whatever it is. So it's new, different, and it goes against the fundamentals that you spend a lot of time thinking about and teaching. So your natural reaction is, that's wrong. You know what I mean? And I get that. I don't think that's wrong. Like that's a normal human reaction. So, when people see butterfly muscle ups, it initiates an emotional reaction, either like, wow, that's crazy, or that's like insanely dangerous and stupid, because people don't understand the application of it. And it's not a slow, controlled movement. It's for speed. And it's like anything, it's like, okay, I'm going to teach you how to move from one point to the other as safely as possible. I'm going to walk, but if I want to get there faster, I'm going to run. That adds some risk. And the first couple times you do it, 100 times you do it, it's not going to look very sexy or smooth, but it is a whole different experience. It's a whole different application. It's a whole different purpose. And so it's also like, you take track and field, and the 400-meter run or the 200-meter sprint. And then you put these like barriers along the way that you have to jump over, that's not very safe in comparison to just sprinting, And the first time you see that, you're like, that's stupid. That looks like an idiotic thing to do, to try and jump over something while you're going as fast as you possibly humanly can. You know what I mean? So, pole vaulting is another example. What if you'd never seen a pole vault before and you saw somebody running with this giant stick and flinging themselves in the air? You'd be like, what an idiot. You know what I mean? So, anytime that you see something new and different, especially if it opposes the fundamentals of what you know to be true and what you put out into the world, it's going to feel pretty, I guess, like opposing, and it's going to feel like that doesn't agree with me, potentially, So I think that's a good category to address.
Yeah. And obviously it has a strong emotional reaction, right? Because they're spending their time writing things on the internet about it.
Right.
Like it makes them feel a certain way, whether they want to admit it or not. Right.
100%. Yeah. And like I said, I get it. Like I'm not a coach myself, but I'm a 12-year CrossFitter. I've helped people develop their movements to be safer and things like that in daily training. And I get the concept of seeing what you might consider something that opposes you, what you would teach somebody else, and being like, oof, that's kind of like, not sure that that's good, without understanding that this is a completely different application. And this is a sport that we're playing, and it's not daily training. There's no reason to worry about that person hurting themselves training, because that's not what they're doing. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. They're performing an athletic feat that, a fraction of the percentage of human beings can do. And most people do recognize that. And that's why we've grown to be able to grow as fast as we have. And that's why some of our burpee videos go viral, because when you see greatness, even in the form of a burpee, you recognize it. It captivates you. It brings you in.
Yeah.
And so, luckily, the impact of the movements that are performed by grid players, generally speaking, has that impact. But it doesn't mean that there's a percentage of the population that's perceiving that negatively because of everything we just talked about, that then doesn't give it a fair chance. And if they did understand, they might really like the fact that this is maybe a different level of awareness, strength, and ability within a human being that can really positively affect a lot of people's lives, either in the form of spectating a sport or playing it themselves.
This episode is brought to you by Punch Gunk. Punch Gunk is a pain relief and anti-inflammatory rub. You put it on your muscles, your joints. You're going to feel a whole lot better if you use it. I know that a couple weeks ago, My back was killing me from a deadlift workout. Couldn't bend over without strong discomfort. One of the players convinced me to use some, rubbed it on my back. About 15 minutes later, I was doing muscle ups and snatches with no pain at all. I absolutely could not believe it, but it's true. They're a supporter of the podcast now. If you want to try it out, go to punchgunk.com, use code SHARKS10. You'll get a discount. This stuff is amazing. It's all over my gym now. The Southwest Florida Sharks and the Florida Grid League use it. Big supporter of it now. Check it out at punchgunk.com. Use code SHARKS10 for a discount. Right. And that's that group of people that almost had like a perceived interaction with grid, right?
Yes.
And then there's also the people who've had natural interaction with grid, right? So maybe somebody who played on a team one year or tried out at one of our combines, especially in the earlier years, or maybe somebody who reffed or attended or interacted with the NPGL, the National Pro Grid League in the past that you were a part of, but I was not, right? We have all these people that grid has touched in one way or another. And some of them did fairly or unfairly have pretty negative interactions, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And that's true of any sport ever. And that's true of anything. But I guess my hope would be if somebody falls into that category and they hear this to say, hey, why did I have this perceived expectation about what grid is in the past? And is there any reason that I might want to give it another chance now with a new perspective on why that might not actually be a reason to consider the sport to be negative or the FGL to be a negative?
Yeah. And I think there's a couple probably pretty dynamic instances of that, right? So, I mean, you can be careful about what you want to say here. Anyone listening to this, I'm not going to be the tactful one in this. The NPGL, right, rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, especially a lot of the players. A lot of people who played in the NPGL did not leave that with a super positive experience, right? And
100%.
Yeah, and a lot of that was totally fair, right? A lot of not understanding the sport, not understanding they were in a sport and how different that sport was for, say, CrossFit or wherever they came from beforehand. Then I know, I'm the owner of the Sharks, the Southwest Florida Sharks. We were going into our 6th season. I can remember that combine we did at the beginning when we were trying to find players. I think we had 65 people try out for the team. Meanwhile, I didn't actually know how to play the sport yet. So that's 65 people, only 16 of whom made the team, and a whole bunch of people who left either upset or intimidated or maybe wrongfully not picked to be on the team, who now immediately have a negative feeling about grid for the future because of any number of reasons,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that part of that is just, collateral damage of doing anything,
Mm-hmm.
but identifying that, appreciating it, understanding the reasons for it, and then, explaining it is kind of the best thing that we can do to say, hey, if you've ever considered grid to be something you might be interested in, maybe it's time to take another shot.
Yeah, definitely. Especially that group of people who's intimidated by it.
Yeah.
Right. The ones who their level of hate is really just because they wish they could, or they're scared to try,
Right. That's a lot of people too, for sure.
Yeah, quite a bit. You see Taylor Stallings throwing a barbell around, all of a sudden you think that must suck, rather than looking inwardly and saying, I wish I could do that,
Right. Exactly.
And we got that third level of hater, right? Which I think is a really interesting one. So we got, just to recap, right? We got the people who just hate anything that looks like CrossFit, right? If you move a barbell or you're on a pull-up bar and it doesn't look perfect and strict, it must be the worst thing in the world. We got the people who've had some kind of negative interaction with the grid in the past, right? And then who's that third group?
The third group kind of blends with the last group a little bit in a lot of ways, but it's somebody that perceives grid as some sort of competition to CrossFit, and kind of takes the strong arm, I'm going to defend CrossFit emotional approach rather than seeing us as a possible complement to CrossFit. So a lot of that has to do with, again, perception of movement quality and what the application of a movement is, because that obviously bleeds a lot into the foundations of what CrossFit is. But to address a different topic, is the brand of grid, is the sport of grid a direct competitor with CrossFit or not? And it's not in any way. And in fact, I'm a CrossFitter. You're a CrossFitter. You own CrossFit gyms. CrossFit is still a huge part of our lives. It's changed my life in incredibly fundamental ways that, again, is another podcast topic. But ultimately, we see the sport of grid as another way to use what you develop in CrossFit as a form of competition, as a sport, as a way to express what you've built in a competitive format, from a player perspective. But from a fan perspective, it's another reason to pay attention to CrossFit. And when people want to get into our sport, learn about it, learn how they could play, we send them to a CrossFit gym first, because that's where they develop a lot of the fundamentals, getting your body in a more, physically fit form, as well as learning the foundational movements that then translate into some of the other grid movements. So we really, really see ourselves as an entity, as a sport, a complement to CrossFit that will ultimately lead to a more dominant position of CrossFit itself, because we're bringing more eyes to what CrossFit does from a movement development perspective, from an athlete, because we have a lot of crossover between CrossFit and but also, weightlifting, gymnastics, like these are all sports that are supported by those athletes coming and playing ours, because we're cross-pollinating, but we're also celebrating physical strength and physical ability, and giving people more incentive to, get off the couch and run around and maybe play in a grid match with their friends, or go to a CrossFit gym and be inspired to, lift some heavy things and move your body around and in the way that it was intended. So it's a big compliment. I think one of my big goals is to support the growth of CrossFit, because I think it leads to a better society and better human beings. And I think we all kind of feel that way in the sport of grid. And by no means do we want to stamp CrossFit out or see ourselves as a competition to CrossFit in any way.
Yeah, I think there's people who, they identify as one of those things, right? And they think anything other than me must be different or bad, right? But
right.
One of the things I love, man, is I'm 225 pounds. I'm probably not going to beat many people in a burpee competition, CrossFit rewards that, and that's cool. That's the sport of CrossFit is capacity over broad demands, right?
Right.
Grid is literally the exact opposite. I have a 110 pound guy on our team who can't move a barbell, and he can do some of the most exciting things any of us have ever seen in real life.
Right.
There's no place for him in the sport of CrossFit, and that's okay. Yeah. I'm not tall enough to play basketball. That's real, but in grid, he finds a home, and that's awesome. I agree with you that some people kind of think of them as they have to be one or the other, right? But I don't feel that way. I feel like you can enjoy both of those things pretty easily.
Yeah, and an awesome example of everything you just articulated is the weightlifting world benefited because Maddie Rogers found weightlifting through CrossFit.
Mm-hmm.
And she was exposed to, her calling through a separate sport. And nobody's mad at her for leaving CrossFit and going to weightlifting. You know what I mean? And so, if you have a perception about a grid player because they played grid and left CrossFit to do so, or focused on it, it's the same thing. And the same thing is true for CrossFitters that came from gymnastics, and which is a high percentage of high performing CrossFitters. So, any sport that focuses on athleticism and an aspect of human performance lends to the strength of other sports that do the same thing, in my opinion. And CrossFit, unique to weightlifting, gymnastics, and grid, is a training methodology of which we think is great. It doesn't mean you won't depart from some of it a little bit to be the best grid player that you can in some instances. But like you said, same is true of weightlifting, and that's okay. It does mean that the average person that wants to play grid, the first step to doing that is going to a CrossFit gym. And that's the first, most logical step, we'll say.
Yeah, I agree. Find a CrossFit or functional fitness style gym, get in there, improve your overall capacity, learn some of these skills. And then if grid is interesting to you, be like, hey, I'd really like to get better at muscle ups, right?
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. And, just going back to the brand of CrossFit versus the brand of grid, people identify as a CrossFitter, see a potential threat, and therefore resist that threat.
Mm-hmm.
And so, flipping that perception, is important for us because we want to grow as communities together. And another real world comparison that has already transpired between sports is in a little bit different way, but at this stage is similar, is UFC and boxing. So we got to talk to the publicist for UFC from like 2002 until recently. Super awesome experience. But she talked about how boxing resisted UFC in a dramatic, oftentimes legal way, because they saw it as a threat. Now, in that case, it is a lot more threat. They're both sports. They're both fighting sports. They're both vying for the same audience. But I do think there's some, it depends on how you approach it. There's some viability to them bringing each other up. But at the same time, I guess the perception of UFC by boxing at that stage in reality, we fall into that same category in some cases related to, most commonly, people who stand to lose by CrossFit losing ground in some way might perceive everybody that's a potential threat to CrossFit as stupid or silly or not worth paying attention to, and then project that in the world.
Yeah, definitely. And, I think there's one more type of hater that you're not hitting on, because like I said, you're going to be tactful and I'm not. And I think it's just a whole lot of dudes who get real upset seeing women who are stronger than them.
It could be.
I think there's a whole lot of them choosing to comment on social media posts because, if you're a guy, it's pretty emasculating to watch a girl who is significantly stronger than you. Mm-hmm. And again, in Grid, we have some of the strongest women in the world,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Nobody knows Kristen yet, but wait till she gets into this league. It's going to be unreal. It is upsetting, I think, for a certain group of males to see that. And they'll let you know about it on social media, Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and there's other things that we do that have never been done in sports before. Men versus women in races has never happened before. And we go back to the concept of a hurdle, and how the first time somebody was sprinting and jumping over things, that seemed pretty foreign. But you look at a society, men and women in competition have always been separate. And this is a whole nother topic, but
yeah, we'll do a whole show on that one. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But it's one of those things that can feel very foreign to someone and not make sense on what they've experienced their entire life. And therefore they're like, oh, that must be stupid. You know what I mean? And then, the ones that choose to will spend their time, writing comments saying such.
Have you seen you gotta look this up when we're done. There's like collection on YouTube videos of compilations of people falling in the steeplechase.
Oh no, I've not seen
the one where there's like the hurdle and then a thing of water afterwards.
Oh yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
It looks so stupid. It's incredibly impressive, but just so many people fall. And I got to imagine that whoever came up with that was like, let's just make things look weird, man. All right. Sorry. So the $10,000 question, right? Are Grid League movements stupid and dangerous? Like, are they?
Well, I guess, when you really think about the fundamental question, is a Grid League movement dangerous? You have to think about what are other things that are dangerous in the world. The definition of dangerous is putting yourself in the way of harm, right? There's a lot of people that jump off of buildings in parachutes. They jump down sets of stairs on skateboards. They, surf at massive waves that could crush them in a second. So people do a lot more dangerous things out there. Now let's go to the world of team sports. Would you rather do some kipping pull-ups or get hit by a lineman if you want to stay safe, And so the injury rate across sports, Grid is about as far as you can get on the safe side, outside of like maybe curling, something where you're not really exerting yourself necessarily. It's more about, practice and repetition. But anything that you're in an all-out sprint and running and tagging a bag, like in comparison to doing kipping muscle-ups when you have the capacity to do so, is just a silly comparison, quite frankly. And that's like baseball seems like a really mundane sport, but the injuries happen all the freaking time. Golf, people get injured playing golf all the time. So I would put our injury rate in that realm, baseball or golf, quite frankly. And it doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but the big reason people call us dangerous is because they put us in the category of CrossFit and daily training. And that has nothing to do with this. It's like saying, an Olympic weightlifting meet is, representing something dangerous because they're maxing out their lifts. Well, you don't go max out your lifts every freaking day. It's not part of it. Like that's, once in a while. So and that's more of our application. People performing grid movements do them every once in a while. They do them like in practice, as you would football, as you would basketball. So as sports go, safety is not even a question. It's almost like a ridiculous thing. And I understand why it happens. It's just people don't think about it in that way. They say strict pull-ups are safe. Kipping pull-ups are dangerous. And butterfly muscle-ups must be really dangerous then, because they look like an extreme version of cripping pull-ups. And so they automatically label it as dangerous and say, oh my God, it's crazy and dangerous. So I think that's like how that perception develops. But which again, it's human nature. I understand it. I get it. I get why it happens. And I don't fault anybody, but I think if they thought about it a little bit more critically and said, I'm going to go criticize a sport for being dangerous today. Your time is a lot better spent focusing on football, rugby, basketball, any kind of extreme sport like skiing or, wakeboarding or skateboarding. So, speed skiing, just insanely dangerous compared to our sport. So for all those haters that are really concerned about other people's safety while playing sport, go use your time for those sports.
Yeah, right. Like the question is it dangerous? Like, yeah, it's as dangerous as any sport is, right? Mm-hmm. Like, that I run an athletic recovery clinic in Southwest Florida, right? And we see a whole lot more people for hurting themselves twisting in baseball and golf than we do for pretty much anything else, or running, right? Like we're not, like you said, no one's doing butterfly muscle ups every single day, right? That's an athletic activity. Just like you're not getting hit by a 300-pound lineman every single day, right? You do that in sport. So if the wrong person does it, sure, it's dangerous, right? Mm-hmm. If the right person with the correct capacity and trained appropriately does it, probably not very dangerous, Yep.
Especially compared to other sports. But I would put my life savings on the idea that flag football has a higher injury rate than grid does. I've seen more catastrophic injuries in flag football. In the past year, one of our team owners, Matt Hornaday, broke his ankle off playing flag football. I've hurt myself way more playing flag football than I ever have in 12 years of CrossFit. Mm-hmm. It's just when you're putting that, extreme effort and going fast and then cutting on the ground, that, like you said, it's bending and twisting under pressure or weight or whatever. It's dangerous. Like there's a higher rate of risk associated. So I would put a lot of money on the concept that flag football has a higher injury rate than grid.
Yeah, and to make it like really specific, we have 5 seasons worth of data for us, right? Like I know on my team, we've had 2 injuries in 5 years, and neither was catastrophic. They caused someone to miss 1 game. Right. Like I think if you were playing basketball and you had that percentage of missed time, you'd be pretty damn happy with it, Yeah,
100%. Yeah, and basketball is one of those sports that seems pretty darn safe, but the amount of back injuries and twisted knees and rolled ankles that happens in basketball is, 20x what it is in grid.
Yeah. So, I mean, all that being said, guys, we get it. We're on the internet. People are going to hate. That's the thing. Yeah. That's part of internet culture, right? But if you haven't experienced grid yourself, man, go experience it. Don't just talk about it. Be about it.
Yeah. 100%. Well, thanks for talking about it. It's fun to talk about haters all the time.
Yeah, man. We talk about it a lot privately. May as well do it publicly too.
Exactly.
Awesome, Mather. Thanks very much for this, bro. We're gonna end this episode.
Thanks, Nick. Appreciate it.
Thanks for hanging out with us. If you want to find out more about the Grid League, you can find us on social media at FL Grid League or on the internet at www.thegridleague.com. thefgl.com. If you want to find me, you can find me on Instagram at Nick Havish. See you soon.